Hi everyone, Angus here. I had a user today ask me how to use the new screener to find golden cross setups. Golden cross is traditionally where a 50-day moving average crosses a 200-day moving average. So you've got your slower or medium, depending on how you use moving averages, crossing up or down through a much longer or much slower moving average. Normally, you'll find that, even people who trade fundamentals, who don't look at technical analysis as much, will often comment about a golden cross when they see a 50 or a 200, day crossover, just because it, tends to signal that momentum might be coming back into a stock, or, and whether that's the upside or downside is depending on which the direction of the cross is. So if the 50-day is moving down, then it's considered, bearish, and it means that the stock might be, in a significant decline. And if it's moving up, then it means that, the stock might be turning around and becoming bullish, and, meaning that it's a better movement, to the upside, and might continue that way. And often they'll do it, looking at the entire market. So they'll look at something like triple Q and try and work out, if the whole market is in a bullish or a bearish phase. So what we'll do to start off with is we'll add a couple of indicators. So we'll look for our simple moving average. So simple moving average. You can do it with things like, let's look for the default one. So moving average. You can do it with things like a EMA, like a exponential moving average, which is a bit more responsive. But most people look at the simple moving average. So let's stick with that. So I want to have two of them. So I'm going to click it twice. You can see I've added two simple moving averages up here. So I'll close this window. Now what I want to do is I need to configure these. So I've got this thing where green is good. So I'm going to change this one to, let's say, this green here. I'm going to make it nice and thick so it's easy to see. I'm going to change the inputs up here to say this is 50. So this is my quicker moving average, my 50-day moving average. And you can see, some people will say if the price crosses up above that moving average, or crosses below that moving average, it could be a bullish or a bearish signal if the price crosses. But we're looking for, I guess, bigger swings, bigger movement. So let's look for 200. Go to style. I'm going to make this one red. It's not really a bad thing, but it's not a great thing if the 50 crosses below it. It's a good thing if if it crosses above it. So see how here, the stock had been traveling, it crossed here, and that was a fairly bullish signal for the triple Q, which is just basically the top 100 Nasdaq stocks. And you can see, it's ran very nicely all the way up here. It crossed down through here, and so sometimes people see that if it's crossed there, that's a good time maybe to get out of the market for a little bit. And when it's crossed back through here, then again it might be a good time to resume the market, thinking the market might continue to make new highs. And it just depends how you interpret it. It's a very sort of a big signal. Again, it crossed here, continued to go down for a bit. Probably crossed here somewhere. I think it might have touched, it might have dipped under there, but again, it's just a good sort of way to see perhaps where the market's going if you like looking at these two things. So we can see that we've got it on an individual chart, but how do we find charts where this is happening right at the moment? So let's get rid of these two indicators here because they're a bit of a distraction when we're just looking at the moving average. And so what I'm going to do is open up my screener here, and I already had a go at this a little bit earlier. So I'm going to get rid of all these, and I can click on these three dots and I can say remove all filters. And all I've done is I've clicked on the drop down here and I've said, create a new screen, and I've just called it golden crossover. And so let's start from scratch and do that. So I've got golden crossover and I've got no filters. So the first thing I want to do is I want to add my two moving averages, my simple moving averages, to look like this over here. So I'm going to go add filter, and I'm going to go moving average. Look for the simple moving average. I've got my 50-day, and I'm going to go add filter. Now, you might say to yourself, well, what I'll do is I'll add a 200-day moving average as well. But that doesn't really help you, because what you actually want to do is you're trying to say, for this simple moving average, I want it to show me when something happens. So if you click on the drop down arrow and you go down to manual setup, this is the good clue. So whenever you're on any of these, these things, you can modify the filter itself. So I've got my 50-day, 1 day, above or equal. And if I said that here, I'm going to add the simple moving average, and I'm going to say the 200. I'm going to add the 1 day, and I'll go apply. And so now that I've done this, all this one here is going to show me is where the 50-day is already above the 200-day. And so I don't want that. What I'm doing is I'm looking for this cross point. I'm looking to see where it's actually crossed. And so how I do that is I click on this and I go manual setup, and see how under here I can say crosses. And so I can either say where it's just crossed, it's crossed in the last couple of days or so, it's crossed today. Or if I'm looking for a bullish signal where the stock might be having momentum to the upside, I can go crosses up. And if I'm looking for a bearish signal, I can go crosses down. Crosses up might be a good signal to buy. Crosses down, if you already hold the stock, might be a good signal to sell. So let's do crosses up. And so now, see, I've got 5,000, if you can read the small print, but I've got 5,220 symbols selected where the 50-day is greater than the 200-day. And we'll watch how much this changes when I click apply. So click apply, I'm down to 82. So it's saying here that 82 stocks have just recently had the 50-day moving average cross up through the 200-day moving average. So let's check. Wow, Game Square is going bonkers. Whatever's happening with them, that's a crazy move. 40%, that's interesting. So you can see here change 40%. Now, I've got relative volume here. Like, see how you got column setups. You can theoretically go and add different columns and things like that. A little bit the same as the filters up here. These things don't filter on the old TradingView screen. I used to be able to filter on these, but these are now just almost purely for sorting. And you can see here I've got this column. I'll just see if I can move it across here. I've got this column called relative volume. I quite like relative volume because what it's saying is, I'm pretty sure it's over the last 10 days, but it's basically saying today's volume is greater than the average of the last 10 days volume. And all it means is that you're seeing a bit more volume on today's interactions with that particular stock or asset versus the last 10 days average. So I like the idea that there's if a stock's crossing over and it's moving up and it's got momentum behind it, you'd expect to see more volume coming through as well. And so think about it, that is it's got 24 times more volume today than it has had over the last 10 days. And if I look down here and I'll double click on it just to make it easier, see how this is the volume chart. And so you've got way more volume over the last day than you've had over the previous day. So that's what that sort of reflects. See how in here I no longer have my my price table. And so it's a little bit of a funny thing where I'm going to move this back all the way. In fact, I'll have to hide it, I guess. Might even have to close it. And I'm going to move this wider. So see how my price is over there. So I'm going to move that across. I'm going to click on my screener again. And so now I've got my screener back. I'll move that across and I've still got my price chart there. I'll click on 1 year to put it back to 1 year. Now, game is obviously crazy, so I don't want to worry about game. Now, I also want to make sure that, see how these stocks here have, got volume, but some of these have barely any volume. And I like to trade stocks that are more liquid, so I don't want to really have stocks where there's less than 100,000, volume each day. So even though this one here, you probably have to zoom in a long way to see if it's crossed. See how it's crossed? So the little green line's above the red line. So technically it has crossed, even though it looks on this view, very flat. But it's got so small volume, so I really don't want to see those. So I'm going to go back up here just to make my life easier. I've got 82. I don't want to go through all 82. I'm going to click on that. I'm going to go volume. I'm going to say average volume over, let's say, the last 90 days, because I really want to see stocks where they're pretty heavily traded. So I'm going to go add filter. And I'm going to go on this one. I'm going to go manual setup. I'm going to say 90 days above, let's say 100,000. It's up to you what you make it, but I just want to filter out some of the junky, low traded stocks. So I'm down to 48, so that's still quite a few. If I look at the price, I want to get rid of these ones. See, it's got 0.003, 0.2, 0.03. So I'd like to maybe get rid of some of those smaller penny type stocks. I'm going to go price. going to add a filter to it and see how it's already got, you can filter, through here anyway, but I'm going to go manual setup, and I just want to look at the stocks where, let's say they're above $10 at least, so above or equal to $10. Right, so down here, I'm down to 28 stocks. So let's click on the first one, so NBIX, and I've got it sorted by this relative volume. So there's more volume coming through in the last day than there has been for the previous few days. So to me, he looks really messy. There's lots of gaps. I don't know what's going on with that stock. So it's not a stock that I personally would like to trade. Maybe there's a short-term trade in it, but, to me it looks a bit messy. Let's have a look at air. Messy. I like stocks that are nice and a nice sort of trend. Let's go 1 year, just to make sure my chart's right. Messy. PBT looks a bit better. Had a big pullback here, so it'd be interesting to see if that one took off and ran again. That might be because the dividends was a bit before. You can see on this one it's been much higher, so maybe that's a little bit interesting. You can see that it's had a really good run. When it broke its moving average here, it did run for a very long time. What's that? That's a I went to there. See, that's like a 550%, 542% run when that one did run. So that was quite interesting and rewarding if you're on it. So who knows? This one here, it's indicating it's crossed, but you can see it crossed here and it didn't keep going. It's crossed here. Will it keep going? Who knows? Buyer beware of these sorts of stocks, but you could maybe take a punt on it and put a stop loss up here, quite high. But I'd certainly want that one to play out for a bit longer before I would take a trade on that. Let's have a look. Might be interesting. It's had a good long-term run, had a big pullback. That looks like it was earnings was good there. Earnings was a bit bad there, but it already had this big drop. So you want to try and work out what the catalyst for that drop was. Garmin's obviously a fairly big, fairly well-known company. It's crossing over here. It might be a good signal to perhaps have a better look at that. OFG, messy. Dino, no clue. Not doing too badly. It's been up, quite a bit higher. Earnings has, been a nice surprise, 37% surprise on earnings. So, that would help explain why it's got a little bit of momentum with it. Triple R, VLO, KNSL. You've really just got to go through and look to see what might or might not attract you to, looking at one of these stocks. They're pretty choppy, aren't they? Pretty good run. Got a cross, bit of a sort of resistance-y support area, but more resistance and support. You'd want it to break through there before you'd, think about entering that one. So anyway, that's the way to find when a golden cross is, happening on a chart. And as I said, it's normally sort of used for, I guess, bigger moves and perhaps by more traditional brokers where they want to put clients into a longer term trade. And it's especially used by some of the talking heads on TV when they're talking about how the overall market's performing. But not too bad. You can use it for entries, you can use it for exits. And the purpose of this video is more just to show you, how you can find it and how you can find it as it happens, and then perhaps adding a few more filters just to reduce the universe you have to look through. It's a big drop off that, whatever that was. See how this one sort of, liked in the past trading up around this sort of level. And so sometimes I look at these, and this is definitely not trading advice. It's highly speculative. But, I might look at that and I might, pull out this little tool. You can find it under, this toolbar here. And I might say, well, this one here, it's had a bit of a pullback. But, even if it got back to somewhere around here, that's nowhere near its former, sort of highs. But, it's not a bad return, if it does wiggle up. But, something like this I'd want to follow with a very tight stop loss just to make sure if it did reverse and did fall back down here, I don't take too much heat. So if it went from there down to, see how it sort of stopped about here, that's 10%. down here's 20%. So you might sort of look at this and say, well, I can put a stop loss somewhere here around, that 5, 6, 7% type mark. Risk it dropping down 8% for maybe going up, in the sort of 30% type range, or even if it got back up to there, that's 12%. But it's had a long, 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 long downtrend, and so you'd want to be a little bit careful, I guess. Anyway, that's probably enough to show you how golden crosses work and how you can find them. Whether you trade them or not, totally up to you. Anyway, as always, thank you very much for listening. Make sure you save your indicator. That's a key thing. That'll save the filters that you've got, and then you can always go back to it if you want to. But definitely don't forget to save it. As always, thank you very much for listening.